Welcome back. Despite all the challenges that we face in South Africa, we are still a hopeful lot. We are very optimistic that somehow the current elections will give us a solution post-May the 8th. But what kind of country and nation are we going to build beyond that? We more or less know what the problems are. But then, Andrew, again, I start with you. The opportunities that you see South Africa having as we move forward, what is it that we can do and which that if we just focused on those things, we will emerge stronger than where we are now?
Well, there's no quick fix for the problems that South Africa has, and we've seen that with Eskom and we've seen that with state capture. But I think Ramaphosa has identified institutions, the state being the key thing that needs fixing, and the damage that it suffered over the last decade. Without that being fixed, you can have charismatic leaders, you can have good intentions, but you can't sustain long-term growth. What struck me with the ANC's manifesto, no mention of foreign investment at all in it. It's a sort of poisonous phrase. And yet we see Cyril Ramaphosa going out very vocally, campaigning for it. So there's a disjoint there. There are things like tourism, which should be so much better for this country. And we were talking earlier about looking around the continent and trying to build on what other countries, reaching out to Ethiopia, to Nigeria, to a lot of countries that are trying to make this Africa Rising narrative that we've heard so much about over the last decade and which seemed to have lost its way, but which is still there, inter-African trade needs to be boosted.
Within communities, however, in South Africa, on one hand, there's talk that we are all Africans, we must embrace each other, but now and again we see xenophobic violence erupt. But having said that, the opportunities are still there. There are certain things, to pick up on the theme, that we could be doing, that we should be doing, that somehow can improve the situation of our country.
Yeah, look, South Africa, despite everything that has not worked properly, is a leader and can still be a leader in Africa. But it mustn't be a shy leader. South Africa must continue to engage in Africa. There are many opportunities, I think, for us, for the continent, really, if there's a lot more integration economically. But South Africa must also be clear about what values it stands for. Let's talk about the right of LGBTI communities, LGBTIQ communities. They are enshrined in our Constitution and Bill of Rights, but a few years ago, South Africa decided to abstain from a UN resolution to protect the rights of those communities. And when the Minister of Foreign Affairs was asked why South Africa took the stance when those rights are protected here at home, her response was, well, we don't want to be seen to be walking too far ahead of our African brothers and sisters. And I think that's nonsense. I think, leadership can be a lonely place to be. South Africa must be prepared to stand fast. The al-Bashir story in South Africa, for instance, they should have said, but this man is being accused of gross human rights violations where he comes from. When he comes here, he must know that there's a chance that he will be arrested. And this is what we stand for. When somebody steals elections somewhere, South Africa must be able to say, no, we do not support that. We want to work together with everybody. But, all of the problems that Africa has globally are not caused by the West or by people out there. A lot of them are home-brewed problems. We need to be able to look in the mirror in Africa and acknowledge what we see. So South Africa has a role to play. First, to engage positively, to help create opportunities for other economies around the continent to flow more easily. But it also has to say, but these are the values we stand by. Without a system of values and somebody's defending those values, we're going to end up in places that we never thought we'd be at.
And I think, again, back to the ANC's election manifesto, what you see is a party that is such a broad church, and that's been understandable and good for South Africa for a long time, but its manifesto is so broad. There's so much detail, but there's so little precision in it. It's trying to cover every single base, whereas what I see with the DA is slowly, having for a long time simply said, we'll do the National Development Plan, we'll do the ANC's thing, but we'll do it better and more honestly. They are now pushing to the right and beginning to set out their stall as a party of small business, as a party of the right of centre. And what you're not seeing from the ANC yet, although its rhetoric is moving to the left, you're still seeing it trying to be everything to everybody. And that includes being everything to the dictators in Sudan and in DRC, as well as supposedly paying lip service to the values of democracy and the poor and the dispossessed. It can't have it both ways forever. It's served it for a while.
But you know that there's also
right.
a view amongst the young South Africans, especially in the black community, that, you know, things are going to come right if they take over as the youth and they see vibrancy in the economic freedom fighters, for instance, the EFF. Many young people say the EFF is the future. Do you go along with that view, you think? Or Solly, who wants to go first?
Well, again, let's go back to the manifestos. The EFF manifesto is by far the most exciting, the most ambitious of the three, but it is the manifesto of a party that knows it is not anywhere close to being required to implement. All of it's very grand, very impressive, but I think to a lot of people, utterly implausible promises, you know, growth, economic growth of 6% in 2 years, 10% within a few years after that. These are fantasy promises to some extent, even though there's a lot in there that clearly is very exciting and very populist and clearly demands people's attention. But I suspect if they get closer to power or to coalitions, then reality will have to sink in at some point, and they will.
Well, the EFF manifesto is a very populist one. It says what young people who are angry, unemployed, without opportunities want to hear. And as Andrew says, if you give them power, they're not going to be able to deliver on all those things. But it's the excitement of it all and the frustration that people have with the status quo that is driving some of those young people towards the EFF. But South Africa doesn't operate in a vacuum. We are part of a global system of regulations and laws, whether you accept them or not. This is how there are international conventions that we have to adhere to. And when I listen to Malema speak, sometimes he strikes me as somebody who doesn't seem to have the readiness, the temperamental readiness to accept that he cannot have everything he wants in the system of communities, whether it's a small village, mid-sized village, a huge village, or a global village. There are regulations, and we all have to live by those regulations. And there are values that we have to live by. And I'm not sure that the leadership of the EFF has the sufficient level of readiness temperamentally to lead a country. Forget about the global environment. A country as diverse as South Africa. I mean, we hear how they go on insults of white people, Indian people, and so you need balance. You need emotional intelligence to lead a country like South Africa. I really wish Ramaphosa could be the guy, but not the ANC. You know, because we do need somebody who's able to have a view of what's going on at home, what's going on in the rest of the continent, what's going on globally, and what South Africa needs in order to fully integrate the global system. We're going to have, it's a give and take. It's not just take.
And structurally, I mean, you were talking about needing a kind of head of state who was above it all, right. And I joked about needing the Queen of England. But actually, it does strike me that Cyril Ramaphosa has an awful lot of hats to wear and an awful lot of work to be doing and juggling at a time when really you need a head of state who is more symbolic, who does the foreign stuff, who does the grand events. But you need a prime minister, younger, energetic, who can really sort things out. And I suppose people would say Pravin Gordhan or someone who's doing that job, but maybe they need to look at structural changes.
Well, they would say Pravin Gordhan, that's the last person you should talk about. Maybe Ace Magashule would be the right person. Well, no, I mean, he's popular within the organization, of course. I mean, he would not have been the Secretary General of the organization, don't you think?
Oh, you're funny. Look,
what do you mean? I'm funny.
I think
I'm
that
serious.
You know, it's a pity that we've lowered the bar so low that you know the kind of people we celebrate as heroes, as heroines, to come nowhere close to being the kind of people that this country. We must always make reference to who we are as a country, where we're trying to go as a country, before we decide then what kind of people do we celebrate as a country.
Do we have a common view of what brand South Africa is all about or should be all about? And I'm talking about brand South Africa for purposes of growing the economy, of putting us up there where we aspire to be, including where we once were, you know, even now in this short period of 25 years.
No, we don't.
Yeah.
But we could have. We have, you know, every brand has to have a vision. We set a vision in 1994. Every brand has to have a set of values. So we have those set of values. We also have the founding documents in the Constitution and Bill of Rights. But every brand also needs to have a leader who is able to live those values and to always remind people, guys, that's wrong. That's not where we're going. Stop that diversion there. This is where we're going. All right? But we don't have that. So what South Africa needs is somebody to always remind us that no matter how much we differ on different, we will always differ. Like in all families, there are differences. There is a bigger South Africa project we have to build, a bigger South African identity we have to build. But it's hard for that kind of identity to be led by somebody who always has to wear a party political hat. I really seriously think we need to think about a structural change in the governance of South Africa. We need a president who doesn't have to belong to a political party every day, a president who will be for all South Africans, who will always say, wait a minute, the Constitution doesn't say so, not the party manifesto doesn't say so. We don't have that. That's why everybody is pulling on into their own lagers, and that is very unfortunate.
Well, in an ideal world, Andrew, what kind of South Africa, if all things were equal, do you think would emerge beyond the May 8th elections? In the ideal world, what kind of South Africa do you think we can build?
I have a bias because I come from a Western democracy where we are used to throwing out governments. Yeah. And although we all feel quite tribal about who we support, left or right, we understand that it is healthy for those parties to have a spell in the wilderness, because like Blair, like Labour, these supposedly promising parties, after 10 years in power, the power destroys them or corrupts them. So I would like to see South Africa get to a point where it is relaxed about losing power, because although I suspect that this country will handle that transition when it comes in a much more mature way than a lot of post-colonial countries have, because it is such an ordeal to get over that hurdle. It is something that I think people from abroad watching South Africa worry about, and that's why, rather than seeing the contestation with the EFF and so on as something healthy, they simply go, oh my God, it's Zimbabwe or Venezuela, it's all a disaster. Of course we're not going to invest long term, because that's what all African countries do.
A quick word from you. The ideal South Africa, you think, will come out of this, and what would that be?
Not of these elections. I think not with the current. Unfortunately, we're still going to be the ANC. Everybody says the ANC is going to win, and the ANC is not preaching from the same hymn book, as it were. Makashule will always be breathing over the shoulders of Ramaphosa until the justice system acts and takes away all the.
So it depends on a whole variety of factors. Then, the outcome of the elections, the outcome of the commissions, and what the state institutions do, and what South Africans expect from themselves. Gentlemen, thank you very much for having been my guests. I appreciate that we managed to have this chat and reflect on our state of the nation as well as our aspirations going forward. In a short while, we'll be discussing the uprisings in the different communities. It looks like protest demonstrations have shot up in this election period. What does this tell us about the state of politics in South Africa? We'll be having that discussion in a moment.